Hey folks, welcome back to the 90th DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A segment. Are we
Is that my cue?
That's your cue, and then we'll come up with an A to go with it.
All right. So we really only have an hour today because, as Bret mentioned in the last hour, he's got to go catch a plane. That's why we're doing this early today. So I know I got a question from the Discord server this week, and my email, everything about my computer is failing. So I do have another one on the way, another computer on the way, which one I will hurl this into, well, trash bin, I guess. So Zach says he's going to get it to me because I can't find it anywhere. So we're going to start with a question that apparently came in last week at the very end and we didn't see. Here we go. I cannot find anywhere online that Dr. Robert Malone is the inventor of the mRNA vaccine. Could you please direct me towards a source that confirms his status as the inventor of the mRNA? In fact, I found only different versions of the history of the mRNA with different inventors every time, which in and of itself is strange, and that involves Dr. Malone. I absolutely trust you, though. Also, is the mRNA a discovery or an invention? Well, and there's a word there missing, right? Like mRNA.
Yes.
We have discovered mRNA. And I think Dr. Malone has clarified that he invented the vaccine delivery platform, right? And so that is an invention using discovered parts from nature and also using some engineered things, which are a creation.
Yeah, so this is my crude understanding, but the basic idea is the environment outside the cell is hostile to renegade RNAs running around, probably because they are indicative of something gone wrong, either a pathogen of some kind or some cell has burst and random messages are floating around.
So there are all these RNases.
Right.
So, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, but
yeah, I think
all these things that cleave RNA apart.
Yep. So in any case, the invention is the mechanism to convey an RNA message past the cell membrane into the cell, where the ribosomes then do the natural thing that they do when they find these transcripts and translate them into protein. So anyway, that's the invention. I think there are two good sources. One is Dr. Malone's site itself, in which he covers the question of the invention and he provides the evidence.
He's got like patents and such, right?
Right, exactly, and papers and things. And the other is that I believe, why am I blanking?
I don't
Alexandros
Marinos.
Has done an analysis because there was pushback on whether or not Malone was the inventor. And I believe that there's a thread on Twitter. It will take some searching, but I believe he has analyzed the question and validated that in
Alexandros Marinos on Twitter, or Robert Malone, and this is it. So his site at rwmalonemd.com, which I think somewhere, I'm not sure where all it's going to be, but you say he's going to have the list of the papers and the patents and such, which reveal his place in the story. Right? All right. So I don't remember how to use this platform. Here we go. Next question. Can you please discuss the lipid nanoparticles in the vaccine? As well, I have heard humic and fulvic acid is good at enveloping viruses and not allowing them to replicate. Is this a possible supplement to look at to include in a protocol to retard the effects of COVID-19 if you get it? Thank you so much. Your work is greatly appreciated. Well, with regard to the second part of the question, never heard of either of these, don't know anything about it.
Yep.
But the first part of the question, can you please discuss the lipid nanoparticles in the vaccine?
I can't say very much, except that my understanding, having asked the question of Dr. Malone and others, is that basically every cell has a phospholipid bilayer that delineates the inside of the cell and separates it from the outside of the cell. And because it has these fats, basically by coating the mRNA, the mRNA.
AC is on again, coughing.
Yeah. By coating the mRNA in these lipids, it causes the basically globule to join and deliver the mRNA into the cell while protecting it while it's in the interstitial space from these mRNA aces. I don't know much more than that. It's obviously
Well,
formulated.
I read the question as, well, no, actually, maybe that's right. I read it as potentially like, what are they? What's the risk? And this is something that we've talked about before, that the presence of the lipid nanoparticles is an additional novel thing in these vaccines compared to, say, the adenovirus vectored vaccines like J&J and AstraZeneca, which don't involve the lipid nanoparticles. And so we don't know what effects they might have, but it's possible they will have side effects.
Yeah, it's possible. I think there's nothing to say except precautionary principle says you're doing something novel to cells and it may have an effect.
Yeah. All right, next question. As the binary and highly political language around vaccination took hold, I feel like some generally accepted facts were lost in the noise. Development of effective vaccines for respiratory viruses has been a highly challenging enterprise. That's one. Attempted vaccines for coronaviruses have had significant issues with efficacy and safety. That's two. Eradication of COVID-19 has fairly weak parallels to eradication of smallpox and polio. Did positive momentum lead to an unrealistic expectation of the vaccines? Yes, but I would just add the positive momentum was created by some number of forces.
Yes.
We didn't happen into positive momentum, I don't think.
Right. And I think the things that are most troubling are this never amounted to a policy that had the potential to eradicate the vaccine. That was sort of left implied. I mean, eliminate the virus.
So just say that again.
That the vaccination policy, the technology in the vaccines, and the deploying of those vaccines under the emergency use authorization never, as far as I can tell, stood a chance of driving the pathogen extinct. Mm-hmm. So somebody needed to lay out, this is a stopgap because there's another set of vaccines coming down the pike that does have that potential, or this is going to be used in conjunction with these other mechanisms and together they might drive it extinct, or there needed to be an acknowledgement.
Hey, actually, we have no intention of driving this extinct.
Or even if they did, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Even if they had the intention of driving it extinct, it didn't have the capacity, and therefore the analysis for both the individuals and the public health analysis is very different than the strong implication that, hey, if we can get above 70% vaccination, then R0 drops below 1, and then we're on a path to extinction for the virus, and anybody who blocks us from getting to 70% is the obstacle to us moving on permanently from COVID, which was the implication, and it can't have been true.
Right. That assumes no viral evolution, among other things. It assumes
no viral evolution. It assumes that places that can't be reached by the vaccines don't exist or somehow stop interacting with the rest of the world. And so it just simply wasn't in the cards, and we were supposed to infer it. And that's the thing that is so disturbing. And
infer what?
We were supposed to infer that the vaccines were the end of the pandemic, and all we needed to do was get on board, and that would happen.
Yeah, well, I think certainly that's the inference that was trotted out in the messaging.
Right.
Whether or not, I can't remember seeing someone, some credentialed person who's speaking here during the pandemic as a scientist or a doctor saying that, but it probably has happened. You can get people to say just about anything. Some people will say just about anything.
Right. But I guess my point would be, all right, compare the implied but unstated, hey, let's get to 70%. Why? Herd immunity. What will that do? R0 drops below 1, extinction is in the offing, right? That's the implication. Compare that to what we've said, which is, hey, you're not going to get there. You're certainly not going to get there globally with these vaccines. So at the very least, you need a composite. You need people's natural immunity from having been exposed to the virus. That's the fact was a very painful thing that all of these people got sick and many died. But the upside is that they have immunity that's actually robust and broad.
This is not the form of immunity you want because the risks are incredible. But if you had the disease, you have this immunity.
But if you were to add that immunity to vaccine-based immunity, to medicinal therapeutic immunity, like ivermectin, then you might be able to, especially since ivermectin really can reach all of the places that the vaccine can't get to, right? You really could potentially have this. Of course, were there such a thing as a pandemic profiteer, that might look very frightening to them, because it means that this giant new market, which, offers an opportunity to create new products indefinitely into the future, that market might dry up. So anyway, I don't know that there are such people, but it certainly would fit the approach we've seen pretty well.
Yeah. I don't know that we can do anything with this, but I'll go ahead and ask it. As a social worker, I was exposed to an unknown toxin in a client's home. This led to sudden onset asthma, severe chemical sensitivity, and a paralyzed vocal cord. I've been told there is some connection to the vagus nerve. Can you please speak to any part of this confounding problem?
Wow. So it sounds like it's permanent.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not clear from here. That's awful. There is a recognition of vagus nerve involvement in a number of conditions that I think, I don't know why, I don't know what happened, but I feel like the vagus nerve is getting sort of a renewed attention. It's, at the point that I was learning about, it's just one of the 12 cranial nerves, and it's just, it's along with all of its associates, but it seems rather more central for a lot of human things. What?
Because it's such a serious topic, I cannot make any of the obvious puns downstream of the vagus nerve. So we will just leave them implied. You can write them at home as you like.
Well, I mean, I guess one of the things that is true is that what happens with the vagus nerve doesn't seem to stay with the vagus nerve.
Excellent. Yeah, let's leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, do you have anything to add to this one?
No, I don't know. I mean, obviously there's something frightening if, in fact, it was a transient chemical exposure in a client's home and it has resulted in this permanent condition. That's frightening.
Yeah.
I can't say anything beyond it.
Yeah, and there's just, part of what we talk about in the book, and indeed we specifically, there's a section on smells and how smells used to present evidence that you were near something that was dangerous to you if you touched it. And in the modern environment, some smells themselves, just smelling them, can be the toxin, and this seems to be what you're exposed to. But so that is now true. That's an effect of hypernovelty, but it's also true that the diversity of things that are being produced in labs and sold on store shelves and brought into people's homes is just extraordinary, and almost none of it is vetted with any kind of safety measures that I at least would like to be seeing.
So actually, let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
The reason that hypernovelty creates this problem is that things that your ancestors would have been exposed to that were very dangerous, it's very likely that you would have a visceral reaction of some kind, very often olfactory. You would find them disgusting smelling, or in some way it would dissuade you from interacting. So when we create new molecules that your ancestors had no interaction with, it's arbitrary. Mm-hmm. A molecule that's dangerous to you could smell good, the way solvents in paint, let's say, can sometimes smell pleasant, or could have no smell at all. And so what we've got now is a sort of arbitrary map between how things smell and what it means, and the inhalation itself brings these things in, whereas smelling a dead fish, as far as we know, smelling a dead fish isn't dangerous to you, but it does cause you not to want to do any of the things with a dead fish that might actually put you in jeopardy, like try to eat it, right? Sorry.
Just imagining sleeping on it.
Right. Sleep. Yes. Any of those things.
Rubbing it on open wounds.
Emailing it to a friend.
Good. All right. Are we there?
Okay. I think we have exhausted that topic.
Excellent. What's the deal with sweating? I made a comment about sweating like a horse because I know pigs don't sweat and received unexpected pushback. Please give complete evolutionary history for $50. Love you guys. I don't know. So sweating, and then it's about like sweating within particular animals. And I think everyone knows that. I don't know if pigs don't sweat. I don't know that. There are different ways of dispersing heat. right? And mammals have a few of them, and in other clades have others. But not sweating at all isn't something I knew. We know that, for instance, cats and dogs sweat out their paws. At least cats do. I think that's true of dogs as well. And you can imagine that if you're covered in fur, especially if you're covered in a thick coat, sweating is not going to be nearly as effective, because part of what it is putting liquid on the surface of your skin such that any breeze at all effectively brings down your surface temperature, which can help bring down your
well, it's the evaporation.
It's the evaporation, but then also what you get. I think this is usually considered a separate thing, but it's usually in concert with sweating, is vasodilation.
Yep.
And so, you basically get your blood being more exposed closer to the surface of your skin, such that you can radiate more heat. Whereas you get vasoconstriction when you're cold, so that this basically the radiator. That's not most of what your blood is doing, but it effectively is a radiator throughout your body. You want to keep that as close to your core as possible when you don't want to lose heat, and you want to put that as close to your surface as possible when you do want to lose heat. And so vasodilation and sweating tend to go in humans hand in hand.
Yeah, my guess is they always go hand in hand.
Yeah,
that it is exactly how a radiator works, except that it's using evaporation rather than wind to cool the fins of the radiator. But
that's the sweating. The blood circulation isn't using.
But they're part and parcel. The idea is,
point. Yeah, but they really are different.
I don't think so. I think this works exactly like a heat pump in a house, and the basic point is, the heat generated in your body is carried by the blood to your surface. It is then reduced in temperature by the evaporation off your surface, which will be enhanced by any wind that blows away the boundary layers. Because if there's no wind, let's say you were sitting still sweating, then what would happen is you would build up a vapor boundary layer around you, which would reduce the rate of evaporation, so the wetness just sits on your skin. Mm-hmm. So this is why, for example, if you're working really hard at high altitude, when we used to hang out in the Sierras, right? Mm-hmm. If you're at high altitude and you're hiking, right, except like where your backpack is keeping the sweat on your back, you tend to actually be pretty dry. And it's not that you're not sweating, it's that the tendency for it to evaporate off your surface is very, very high, right?
Right, but that's wind, but that's also the...
right, it's the dryness and the low pressure.
Exactly, yeah.
So anyway, all of these things, one of the things that probably has a lot to say about who sweats and who doesn't is, as you pointed out, fur is going to create a boundary layer problem that makes sweating less efficient. Mm-hmm. But there's also a question of whether or not you can afford this mechanism in order to cool yourself, right? You would need access to water in order to make it a reasonable thing to do, because you can dehydrate from basically sweating.
Yeah. I think also the turbinates, the bones inside, especially the carnivores among mammals, the phylogenetic group that is the carnivores, they tend to have these big noses, and
would you like a prop?
Sure. And we tend to think of that because it's in the nose. That's entirely about smell and enhancing the ability to smell. And in fact, it is. Let's see. You can see inside there just hard, I'm going to drop it on my computer. All of those bones inside the nasal cavity are the turbinates, and they provide a tremendous amount. There's a cat hair in there. A tremendous amount of surface area, which, and of course, in the living animal, those are covered in flesh, which includes not just sensory receptors in the form of smell receptors. And so, yes, animals with big long noses with lots of turbinate bones on which to put lots of those receptors do tend to smell better. Is there a way to make that clear?
They smell more effectively.
They smell more effectively than those with smaller noses. But those turbinates also, covered in flesh, are vascularized, which means they have circulatory vessels in them. And so you'll get like more rapid breathing as well when an animal is hot. And that's basically increasing airflow across the vascular tissue, across what?
Well, I was going to add something. I think that's...
okay, So you weren't going to correct me, but like this is absolutely true and not new to anyone. Unfortunately, I imagine it's new to a lot of people, but certainly it is understood that the more when animals get hotter, if they have more nasal space, they will tend to be breathing faster, shorter breaths, and that is going to increase the efficacy of shunting heat out of basically the circulatory system out into the air.
And in a parallel to something that we talk about in the book, which is the difference in body shape between dwellers of very hot landscapes who tend to be lanky in order to radiate heat, and dwellers of Arctic landscapes who tend to be rounder to preserve heat. The turbinates in marine mammals in the Arctic actually have an elaborate counter-current exchange mechanism.
Yes, that's right.
Functions exactly the reverse of what you were just saying, which manages to recapture heat that would otherwise be lost to the environment based on the direction of circulation.
That's beautiful, yeah. So not a complete evolutionary history for $50, but I think you got your money's worth.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to look at a skull.
Yeah, there you go.
This is a little heartbreaking, but how can I go about being in a relationship with my girlfriend who shares a completely different stance on vaccines, COVID, etc.? I'm a 25-year-old male. And we don't know, it doesn't matter who's who, right?
Well, this one's easy, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know. Okay, go for it.
I mean, look, we're in this situation all day, every day with all of the people who are decent and reasonable on this topic. Which is that, I mean, frankly, I've been having discussions where we talk about the situation of what the evidence does and doesn't say, and nobody asks anybody whether they're vaccinated because it's immaterial. The point is we are united in being interested in finding out what is true. And sometimes it's relevant that you are or are not on one side of this, but basically, look, if you've got a strong relationship, then, look each other in the eye and say, I love you. And, just recognize that this is not a clear-cut situation. Reasonable people find themselves on both sides of this issue. The important thing is that you not expose each other to danger, but needing to
right,
agree.
But I think what you just said, reasonable people can find themselves on both sides of this issue. Or rather, I think what you mean is that there are reasonable people on both sides of this issue. The line that we are being fed by the mainstream media and by Team Blue is that is not true. And so if you are in that camp, you are likely being told that if you are in the other camp, and I hate the framing of it being two sides, but then you can't be reasonable and you are putting me at risk and you're the enemy.
Right.
And so, what you just said will work, but it may require like a deculting first.
Yes and no. I mean, look, I hate to say this, but there are certain discoveries about another person that will make it impossible to go forward. If it is true that the person that you are partnered with is going to find your understanding of the evidence and therefore your conclusion about your own health and well-being to be immoral, if that's their position, then either they can be reasoned with and get over it, or they can't, in which case, haven't you just found out something about the character of that person? I mean, really, we're talking about a situation in which the evidence is unclear, and those who claim it's clear are clearly saying things that any reasonable person can understand are not sensible. That ought to cause us to give each other a break. To the extent that somebody has the opposite reaction, to the extent that somebody finds themselves embracing some authority's attempt to demonize some fraction of the population that is not convinced of their safety in light of some piece of advice, that's very frightening. And, we've said it before, there's something terrifying about the fact that we now hear public health authorities inducing citizens to declare some fraction of the population effectively unclean and pathological. Mm-hmm. And I don't think this makes any sense for if vaccine variants are the result of selection in the vaccinated are not at fault. right? To the extent that vaccine hazards showing up in the VAERS database cause people to be unwilling to expose themselves to vaccination, that doesn't mean that the unvaccinated are at fault. It means whatever it is that left us with a signal in the VAERS database that is frightening and that does not tell us what that signal means or explain anything about it, that thing is at fault. And we got to stop going after each other, right? And my sense is we're all in this together, except people who don't get that we're all in this together.
Yep. There are a number of these. I just don't know what to say. I moved across the country right before COVID for a good job at a public university, and now fear that I will eventually be fired for no jab. Do you see the potential for class action? Advice for that path. Many thanks. It's too early to know what's happening.
Certainly no advice.
Yeah.
There are going to be causes of action in various places, and then in other places you're going to find that path has been blocked by legal obstacles that have nothing to do with, your actual moral rights.
Yep, that's right. Lex Friedman and Daniel Schmachtenberger talked about designing social technology. Sounds like a likely hobby of Bret's. Are there any social tech prototypes you can unveil here? From the Militant Moderate.
Well, so you can certainly look up Game B. Game B is kind of a prototype of prototypes. Many of us who were involved in Game B see that Game B is a concept, meaning Game B is a replacement for our current system that is competitively superior to our current system, such that it displaces it rather than having to win over hearts and minds. And lots of us who have seen that as a foundational insight or a fork in our social code are involved in one project or another that we hope produces some kind of Game B, and frankly, only one of them has to work. So there is Game B as the general concept, and then we, in our book, begin to describe something we call the fourth frontier, which is a version of a Game B universe. And I don't know, I guess if you're interested, I would tune into those kinds of conversations. Daniel is a good place to go to, and the more people we have involved in thinking about what we might do for the next phase of civilization, the more likely we come up with something that's really worthy of us.
Indeed. Observing possible ADE/breakthrough in COVID expression, assumption that the vaxxed may be spreaders to the vaxxed unvaxxed. It appears that the vaxxed degrades. Could early vaxxed medical folks be vector of spread variant to vax and unvaxxed? I think this is what we've been talking about.
Yeah, very hard to follow all the the twists and turns.
But I mean, again, we should not be pointing to individuals, but was a technology that was imperfect, and the policy that introduced it pretty slowly throughout all the populations where it was introduced, in conjunction, likely to create the selective pressure to enhance to not produce new variants, but enhance new variants in terms of their frequency in the population. Almost certainly.
So
this is based on really, not just basic evolutionary thinking, which, a lot of vaccinologists and virologists and such maybe don't have any background in that, although frankly, that's not okay. Vaccines are intentionally related to evolution. I don't know. I'm just so frustrated by all of this.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I would say that there are two things implied in the question which are distinct. One is the issue of variants, and yes, people who have been vaccinated and have a breakthrough case pose a danger not only to other vaccinated people, but to unvaccinated people. And, what we have been saying, which I think should be obvious, is that there's an interplay, right? It's not that the unvaccinated play no role in that. It's not that the vaccinated play no role in that. There's an interplay between them. Now, there are other categories, right? You've got within the unvaccinated, you've got people who are naturally immune, as far as we know, because they've had COVID. You have people who have protected themselves with ivermectin. The degree of protection is going to depend on what protocol they've used, and it's going to depend on things that we can't nail down precisely yet because there's not enough information. But
I suspect that the degree of protection is going to hinge in part on the presence of comorbidities. I've not seen that anywhere. But the closest thing I've seen, I've been talking about comorbidities for a while now, but is that deaths, that really bad outcomes from COVID, are almost always in concert with comorbidities, and the more you have, the more likely that is to be true. But I suspect, and I'd like to see some data on this, that actually contracting it at all is going to be more likely if you have comorbidities.
Could well be. But in addition to the issue of variants and who gets infected and who is protected and by what mechanism, the other thing that is mentioned in there is antibody-dependent enhancement, which is a separate question. And the question, we have seen numerous cases in which there's a phenomenon in which the immunity that one has to a given virus actually enhances that virus's capacity to infect and harm that individual. And we do not know that this is taking place here. It is quite plausible that it could take place with respect to this virus. And so those who understand this issue are looking for a signal for this. There are signals that could be interpreted that way. It is not clear that they should be interpreted that way. So this is a question on which many people's fate hinges, but they don't know it. So these two things can go. I think we are seeing variants. It's quite clear that the vaccinated are exerting a selective pressure on the virus that is causing these variants to have enhanced fitness, right? That is distinct from whether or not the virus infecting a person who has been, and by the way, ADE could happen through a natural path, and it could happen through a vaccine path. And the point is the antibodies themselves would provide a mechanism for the virus to infect cells it could not otherwise access. And it's a very concerning phenomenon, but we shouldn't leap to the conclusion that it is out there. We should just be very alert to the possibility that it is out there, and we should be very careful not to be misled about that hazard.
I don't know this study. Barnstable, Massachusetts study said that 69% of the population was vaxxed. Population vax. I'm just trying to understand the acronyms that then get used. 69% of the population was vaxxed, PV, population vaxxed, and 74% of cases were from the vaccinated cases. If the vaccination makes you less susceptible, shouldn't the proportion of the population that's vaxxed be greater than the proportion of cases that were from the vax? Shouldn't PV be greater than VC? I'm trying to read this so it makes sense to people while also trying to make sure I get the math right and translate this. But in this case, I mean, these numbers are really close, 69 and 74, and without knowing anything more about the numbers, we don't know if those numbers are actually close enough to be essentially identical. We can't do the statistics based on percentages. But yes, like the logic is right here. If the vax makes you less susceptible to the disease, then you would expect, I think.
Well, all else being equal, which is a condition certain not to be met.
Can we just say what the thing is, though, before doing the caveats? I think that all else being equal, we should expect that if the vaccine makes you less susceptible, then the percentage of the population that is vaccinated should be greater than the percentage of cases that are among the vaccinated.
I'm going to have to sit down with a piece of paper to figure out what it is, but we could correct the numbers. If you had equal numbers of vaccinated and non-vaccinated, equal percentages of the population, and the those two groups were randomly chosen, then you would expect a smaller percentage of the vaccinated population to turn up positive given equal testing. Now, there are several assumptions in there that are sure not to be met, which is how likely are you to be tested?
Yeah, well, and the first thing is, especially given the rollout anyway here, the U.S., the rollout was to people who are at high risk first, right? And so we have among the vaccinated more of the people who are at high risk of contracting and having bad outcomes from the disease. Therefore, we might expect that in those unfortunate people who are vaccinated that they may be simply continue to be more susceptible than a person who was already healthier, who got vaccinated as well. That it's not, again, it's not vaccinated versus unvaccinated, that there are these other, these other characters that should be brought in to predict what the outcomes would be.
And one thing that I think we don't know anything about, I've never seen it discussed, is what fraction of the quote unquote unvaccinated are people who had COVID and therefore decided, because their cost benefit ratio, as they understood it, would have been different, may have decided. In other words,
decided what?
Not to be vaccinated.
Okay.
So if you had a disproportionate number of naturally immune people in the unvaccinated group, that would distort this calculation.
That would also drive the percent vaccinated, the cases from vaccinated cases to appear to be higher than they are, thus reducing the signal of the effectiveness of the vaccines. Because in the unvaccinated camp are people with actual real immunity from having had COVID. That's true.
So what you would want is somebody to sample and figure out the answers to these questions so that you could correct for these biases, so that you could say, what are the percentages if we exclude people who know that they have, who strongly believe that they have COVID, because those people may have made different decisions about vaccines, right? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. No, it's good. Adding to your fuck you money. Stay positive and keep up the good work, please. Thank you.
Yes, we are nowhere near fuck you money. We are at no thank you money, maybe.
We're at not today money. In episode 88, you talked about aging. Aging isn't a thing, is it?
Not that I know of.
No. Aging and longevity. Therefore, I would like to know if you're familiar with David Sinclair's research, thoughts on NMN and the concept aging equals lost info in the epigenome and telomeres are result not cause. I know you've talked to this before, but
this puts me in a little bit.
This came in both Russian and German. Russian and German.
This puts me in a little bit of a weird spot, because in my long ago paper, my 2002 paper, that's when it was finally published, I mention what, if I had to do it over again, I would call epigenetic entropy, which I called histological entropy, right? It means the same thing. It's a loss of information from the systems that tell tissues what genes to transcribe in order to make their phenotype. And so anyway, I'm fond of the idea that this is an epigenetic failing due to a breakdown in the information. I am less hopeful than Sinclair about the utility of this information and its capacity to engender therapies that will be meaningfully useful in terms of reversing this process. So maybe that's it.
Since people are no longer allowed to be wrong online, and we're now banning misinformation, can we ban the media political complex for its many lies and hoaxes? Hold them to their own rules.
Well, this is, I don't want to get on another rant, but, I was watching Biden tell people that if they get the vaccine, they won't get COVID.
Yeah.
Right? This is flat out misinformation coming from the top.
Yeah.
Right? And the point is, we just have, it's asymmetrical.
Now, so what seems to be true is that the vaccinated have a lower risk of getting the disease, but that protection begins fading pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah. So fully vaccinated isn't 2 weeks out from your final shot into perpetuity. It's like fully vaccinated is like right then, and then a month later you're a little bit less protected. 2 months later, I was shocked at the point Pfizer. It's like, 6 months, kind of not protected anymore. You probably need boosters. 6 months.
6 months. Yeah, that's pretty damn short.
Yeah.
It's pretty damn short, and the protection is pretty damn narrow.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this is terrible because for one thing.
So all the people who got vaccinated early, who were able to get vaccinated early in this, are not fully protected at this point.
And we don't really know what that means.
We don't know what that means. That could mean a lot of things.
We don't know what that means, and we don't know what happens. What does your third shot and your fourth shot mean? You're talking about an immune system that is now primed by your prior vaccinations, right? It is a different immune system than the one that your first vaccination encountered.
You can't jab the same immune system twice.
Yeah, I think I regret that you said that, but it's pretty good. I mean, yeah.
That's true.
Right. I think it's the word jab that throws me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't like it either.
Yeah, I have the sense that some very clever marketing person came up with this because it kind of feels hip and edgy.
Yeah. No, you're right. You can't shoot the same immune system twice.
Shoot. Yeah, I've never heard that before either.
No. Well, it's the present tense of shot, right?
Yeah, you cannot...
Yeah, it's just not going to be as pithy.
No.
Anyway,
really
sorry.
You can't pith off the same immune system. No.
Pith?
Well, you're kind of pissing off your immune system.
Yeah.
Antagonizing it with when people train dogs to attack by having somebody with a suit of something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think we have now gone completely off the rails on this question. But
what, Zach?
I was just going to say you have the Discord question.
Where?
Your email. You should have it now, actually.
Okay. We'll go there next. I had the wrong setting set up in my Substack, and so I've now got like 1,500 emails, most of which are of no consequence whatsoever. So, where did you send it to, Zach? I don't see it.
Hold on, let me check where it's sent. I did not send it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then that's my website address. Yeah. Except, yeah, there's a ton from. It's from.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Yep, got it. Oh, that's why I couldn't find it. It came from a different person this week, and so when I went searching for it, anyway, no matter. Your intelligence. So this comes with a graph, which I don't know if. Let me see. But I don't show anything yet, Zach, because I don't want to inadvertently show any addresses or anything. The question is, your intelligence and ability to dissect complex topics made us surprised at how easily you followed the whole food narrative uncritically, an intriguing but simplistic hypothesis that cannot agree with the attached mortality data. Similarly, Sam Harris readily accepted inaccurate caricatures of your COVID vaccine critiques, which aligned with his bias. Are podcasts still good media for exposing each other's blind spots? That's a mixture of things. Well, so you can show this just briefly. This is the data that they're showing is life expectancy by age in England and Wales, 1700, 2013. This is a graph based on data that I have no idea how it was generated. Our World in Data is the source, but I have spent literally zero time with this. So I'm being asked to uncritically accept a graph as opposed to having spent time with a couple of papers that looked over the data from I think the references to the mid-Victorian era diets that we were talking about 2 episodes ago.
I can't see anything about what that graph even purports to represent.
Just that life expectancy continues to climb. That they're so the paper in question that we were talking about, I think is what it's a reference to, was that from 1850 to 1880 in England, that there were actually that lifespans were higher and that people were healthier and taller.
Yep.
And
no, I remember the paper
and all of this, and this. I maybe doesn't suggest that.
Well,
But
I guess we're gonna have to look at it.
well, but
I mean, I can't even see it.
Oh, I see. Maybe, but also the point of the paper was in part the climb that we have seen, to the extent that there is one that's significant. And a big part of the argument in the paper was there hasn't been a significant improvement, was that we are basically trading off one form of mortality for another. And there were data and arguments in that paper, and they were referencing other papers which I looked at. Whereas this is a graph based on I don't know what, and it makes no assessment about what the cause of death is. And so the argument, and it was based not on a whole food diet, but we have decades of thinking about diet and food, and so there was hardly an uncritical assessment there.
Yeah. Now, what I want to, I'm beginning to understand what this graph is. I'm beginning to understand what this graph is, and I want to know a lot more about what it's graphing to, because to the extent that you have things like accidents.
So, Zach, you should be showing this while we're looking at it. Thank you.
To the extent that you have accidents, or even, I guess bacteriological disease is going to intervene here in some way that arguably counteracts the point that we were making in that previous thing. But I think without knowing what the causes of death are here, this may or may not have an implication.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Zach, if I may, thank you. All right. Next question. So these are just in all sorts of interesting orders. I don't know anything about this. What do you know about the COVID-19 vaccine being produced by Medicago with the assistance of Glasgow? No idea. No information at all. I'm just going to scroll down, try to pick up some COVID questions before we move. We only got 15 minutes left, but then we're going to try to get some that aren't COVID-y here. How many people who got vaxxed and then caught COVID were given a placebo and thought they were protected but actually weren't? I don't know any. The trials that happened. Some people were given placebos, I believe. Not placebos, controls. But I've not heard of this being a thing that's happening.
The allegation that is people after authorization were given placebos.
Yeah, I know that's brand new to me. I
can't imagine how that would be.
Yeah, I don't see even. I can't even figure out what the incentives would be to be doing that.
Be malpractice.
Yeah, but of course, there's a lot of that. So 2 questions here. Could you address Yuri Deigin's follow-up slide deck in response to your critique? I found his new counter-analysis quite compelling. And then another one, apparently that's referring to what he did on Rebel Wisdom. I haven't seen it. We just spent a long time putting out a long written analysis of what we understand the data say. And we're not going to continue to engage in frankly, bad faith critiques from actors who insist on trying to draw our attention away from all of the important things that we're trying to do.
I'm gonna push back a little bit. I don't know that
on what I just said.
Yeah, okay. I don't know that we know that Deigin is involved in bad faith. I think he's being extremely reckless, and he's also being a total dick about it. But he probably believes what he's saying, and probably is motivated in all of it by the belief that it's about saving lives. So I would say bad faith requires that he knows he's saying things that are untrue rather than just being reckless. But what I don't get is Deigin was thoroughly discredited by the Alexandros thread and by our analysis, right? This was nonsense, right? These critiques were really low quality. They reported wrong things about what we said, about what others said and concluded. So why...
About what's in the scientific literature.
Right. So why are we expected to respond repeatedly?
Yeah.
My sense is when somebody has been as thoroughly discredited as Deigin has been, sorry, we need a better interlocutor before we're expected to respond to it.
Yeah, we need better skeptics.
Yeah.
This is from someone whom we respect a lot. So I'm going to ask the question, but I don't quite understand it. Okay. Is pedophilia software-based? Oh, this is about human software. Okay, so it's pedophilia software-based. It seems to be used to break young people's respect for themselves and weaken their ability to resist corruption. A tradition worth enhancing in a totalitarian spirit. So I think what this is coming from is like, is this on the rise? Is like people who are actually suggesting that this should be one of the most egregious things that people can possibly engage in, being trotted out increasingly by those who are saying, yeah, maybe you just should accept this. It's completely reprehensible and disgusting. But it does potentially serve to further break reality and internal locus of control and a moral sense that if
in whom? In adults who are not involved in this discussion, just seeing this discussion happening, or what?
I think frankly, potentially everyone, but in any one of these cases, as soon as you are forced to accede to something that isn't true or isn't right, so the accede to something that isn't true, men or women. Once you've said that, you're just like in a different spot, right? Once you've been forced into a position that turns out wasn't the position that you thought it was, perhaps, you're in a different spot, and it's harder to get back to the position that you were in. And with regard to this, once you have been forced to entertain the idea that, and I've heard people I respect, and I've been shocked to hear people I respect say, oh, it's been said that pedophilia is just another sexual orientation. Like, no.
Yeah.
No, don't go there. Don't go there. That is horrifying.
Well,
do not go there.
This is horrifying because it psychologically cripples people. It cripples them when they're children, and they carry it for life. So that is why this topic is permanently beyond what reasonable people will entertain.
Yeah.
But with respect to the question, I still think the question is too vague. Is pedophilia software-based? I think we know that it is at least partially software-based because we know that people who have been abused as children often go on to abuse. That suggests that it is an acquired characteristic. I think what the person who asked the question is asking is the discussion of it amongst people who presumably aren't involved in it. And that may well have something to do with authoritarianism, arguably totalitarianism. But I think the basic point is, yes, this is something we all agreed is completely beyond the pale until very recently, where people have been exploring this question publicly as if there's something to be discussed. And, I don't know. I know James Lindsay has pointed this out. I haven't followed closely his argument here, but yeah, I do think we are in danger effectively of watching things that we thought at least we will never have to entertain that question. We are now watching these questions entertained in polite company, and that's a very dangerous sign about where we are.
How do you guys deal with high pressure speaking events? TED Talk, Joe Rogan podcast. Any psychological tricks, advice? So, I mean, you've done more of these than I have, but I think, frankly, getting up and talking at length for hours on end in front of college students for 15 years did it, right? It just... Yeah.
I mean, so I think there are two things.
As much as 25 or 50 or 75 college students isn't the same as, an audience of millions, but...
Right, but it works.
But it works.
It works over time. I would also say I used to tell students that... I have the sense that the number may very well be different for each person, but there's some relatively small number of instances in which you get up in front of an audience and speak that you have to go through before it's in any way comfortable. And let's say it's 25, but most people in their lifetime maybe get to 19 or 20. So they never get the sense that actually, okay, you do kind of get over that, right? So the answer is, what do? You force yourself to do it, and then you figure out how to evaluate it without you want to dwell just exactly the right amount, right? You want to stop dwelling on your errors at the point that it's no longer useful.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, if you had asked me at 16 or 18 or 21 if I was going to end up comfortable and actually enjoying talking to people, I would have said, no, hell no, no way. No, no way. But you start doing it, and that's it right there. And in fact, that's part of why I always, it's harder the more students you have, but I tried to have students present at least a couple of times during each 10-week quarter to everyone. And that's, if you have a lot of students, that takes up a whole lot of class time, and it eats up some of what else you can do with the curriculum. But just even getting up, knowing, okay, you got 5 minutes to tell everyone, where you are in this quarter-long project. And we're looking at everything, and I'm going to be honest with you. Right? Not just the content and your conclusions, but the design of the slides and how you present, and whether or not you looked some way that was drawing attention to how you look as opposed to what you were saying, all of these things. And, students who had us over many quarters, therefore just got a lot of experience of getting up in front of their peers and saying stuff that was different from their experience on social media, for instance.
Yeah.
And it helps.
It does help.
Structural biochemist here. After several math challenges to Darwinism recently, is there a way to save the theory of evolution from the ash heap?
Could you repeat that?
Structural biochemist here. After several math challenges to Darwinism recently, is there a way to save the theory of evolution from the ash heap?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I only think I know what you're talking about. So I've been arguing that there is a problem with Darwinism as it is currently presented. This is leaving open the door to challenges that Darwinism itself is false. But in fact, the cure for these things is the recognition that there is a layer of Darwinism that is not well recognized that explains the enhanced power of Darwinism to generate adaptation. So the way I've said this before is the story in the Bio 101 textbook that you have random mutations and selection, which alters genes that then results in the change in form of creatures that turns a shrew-like animal into a bat. That story can't be right, because the difference between a shrew and a bat is not housed in the shape of its proteins, right? That's not to say proteins have no impact on it, but it's to say that a random process that tried to turn a shrew into a bat by working at the molecular level in this way doesn't really add up, right? The difference between a motorcycle and a pickup truck is not inherently chemical. There are chemical differences, but that's not where the information is. So what I've argued is that there's something called explorer modes, and explorer modes, which we cover a pretty good introduction to them in our book. Explorer modes are mechanisms whereby selection reduces the search space so that the search is more efficient for forms that are viable. And so the long and short of it is, yes, the solution to the problem that you're pointing to, if it's the one I think you're pointing to, is more and better Darwinism. It is not to consign Darwin to the ash heap of history, because Darwin wasn't wrong. The mistake that you're talking about happened after Darwin.
Okay. We've got 4 minutes. There's 4 questions here that I really want to get to.
Okay.
Let's see
4
if we can do
questions in
it.
4 minutes.
Yeah. If we take 8 minutes, maybe we'll call it okay. I think you'll still catch your plane.
We'll see.
Which one of our senses suffers the most from modern life? How to improve it? So I'm going to spend hours on this question, and I don't think we can do it quite so simply as which one suffers the most. But my sense is that so we are being targeted on all of our senses by the modern environment and by advertisers in particular. But maybe the one that is sort of cryptically the most affected, I'm going to cheat here, the ones are the chemical senses, which is smell and taste. And because we are being gamed in our smell by things like deodorants and perfumes, okay, but specifically the odors being put into products that would otherwise smell incredibly foul because of what it takes to make them. And so you have these synthetic odors that nominally smell good to cover the foulness. That means that we cannot use, as we alluded to before, we cannot use our sense of smell as we used to be able to use it to drive us towards healthier actions. And the same thing with taste. We're having our long ago selection for sweet and for umami and for salt gamed by the ability to cheaply and quickly add them to processed foods, such that those things that taste good aren't anymore those things that are rare or good for us. Anything?
Yeah, I would just say all of them are worst affected. Maybe if I had to break one out, I would actually say it's the ability, the sound, the ability to hear things. That there's so much in our environments. You are so constantly filtering out the noise, whether it's the hum of light bulbs or, cars on the highway, that, next time you're somewhere where you can't hear any of those things, and it is actually pretty hard to get to where you can't hear any of those things, but next time you're somewhere that you really can't hear any of them, take a moment to listen. Right? It's a very different planet.
So we've already failed to do this in anything like short, but I'm reminded of the last time that we were in the Amazon in January 2020. And it's super, super remote, super deep. There's no roads, but some number of miles away, even though super deep, super remote, all of this is unfortunately a new oil
platform.
Oil platform. And we were on this Oxbow Lake looking at Watson at one point, and we suddenly heard the sound of machinery. And in part because it's so flat and there's so much less else that you were hearing, we could hear whatever had ramped up the generator or something from many miles away, this freaking oil platform in the middle of this extraordinarily large, expansive, wild
most
nature.
Most diverse habitat on Earth.
And there it was.
Yep.
I am a white male U.S. high school biology teacher in an urban, predominantly Black area. Critical race theory is encroaching here. How can I battle this to ensure the best education for my students? It's possible. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna see if I'm gonna forward that question to the next session so that we do it a little bit more.
Okay.
So we're gonna see that one next one. So we're gonna just answer two more here. Thoughts on quercetin? It's an easy to find supplement that is a zinc ionophore. By chance, we were just talking about this week. In general, we are a fan of getting what you need through your diet rather than through supplements. But in an era of pandemics, there are things that you can use that are useful. C and D and zinc being among them. And yes, zinc is often not bioavailable in the forms that we take it in, especially when not as part of your diet. And yes, quercetin seems to be a thing that facilitates the uptake of zinc.
Yeah. I think there are things that seem to be low cost and have the potential to be useful. And it's very hard to know when you take them whether they're doing anything for you.
Right. And finally, if you had to choose one type of domestic animal to live with, what would it be and why?
It's a little hard to answer that question here with the kitty cat sitting on the table. Well, I will say this.
I think this is a question on which we might actually end up having different answers. That's why I asked it.
I actually prefer two different creatures for two different things. Huh. I prefer hanging out with kitty cats. They're very yes, perfect. Good. They're very lovely company, and they're also utterly fascinating to think about what they're thinking. And I prefer to do stuff with the dog. If you're going to go, the dog can keep up with you on your bike and can go for a hike with you and loves to go to the river and swim. And so anyway, I think it divides for me between...
You're cheating. That's awesome. I mean, I agree with you. Yep. And I think most people who like both would, maybe they wouldn't have that framing, but I do. We've talked about this a lot.
I grew up with dogs, not cats, but I'm really not a one or the other person. I really appreciate both species for different things. You?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I grew up, my brother had a dog, but I had a cat earlier, so I grew up with cats, and we had 2 for a little while. But yeah, if I actually absolutely had to choose, I would choose cats.
All right.
Yeah, I said it.
You did. You said it.
You won't, but okay.
And he didn't know what you said.
No, he doesn't. And whereas if Maddie was in the room, if our dog was in the room, she'd be crushed.
No.
She'd love me just as that's why.
Yes.
She'd love me just as much no matter what. And I don't understand. I don't understand. There's nothing you can do as long as you're decent to your dog that changes how they feel about you.
They're very marvelous people.
They are. All right. Well, I think we've reached the end because you got to like throw your stuff in a bag and get on a plane.
Go.
Let's see. I've already closed my notes for the day. We join our Patreons, please, and consider becoming a free subscriber at my new Substack, which is naturalselections.substack.com. You'll get an email with each new post every Tuesday, and sometimes more often than that. There is a tip jar on Odyssey that you can use to give us tips in libraries, blockchain, or fiat, American dollars, currency. You can get our new Goliath t-shirts at store.darkhorsepodcast.org. If it doesn't have the words on the back, it's not the real thing. Right? Email questions, logistical questions like, hey, we got a box of mangoes this week from a fan who grows mangoes. They were fabulous. They are fabulous. We just picked them up yesterday. And that person knew where to send them by asking darkhorsemoderator@gmail.com for the address of we have a P.O. box and an address for their P.O. box where you can send packages. And we ask that if you are willing to subscribe to all 4 of our channels, the 2 on YouTube, Bret Weinstein's main one, and Dark Horse Podcast clips, and the 2 similarly named ones, identically named ones, I think, on Odyssey. Anything else to say?
I don't think so. I think it's time to close out with
be good to the ones you love and get outside. No. Wow, I screwed it up.
Try
be
again.
Good to the ones you love and eat good food and get outside.
Be well, everybody.